I felt the door open before I heard it, the way I feel everything, and then I felt nothing at all, which is how I knew something was wrong. My antennae are not decoration. Every HFY is born with them, fine filaments that read air pressure, heat, vibration through stone and steel, the chemical ghost of anything that breathes. On my homeworld, silence was never safe, the things that killed you moved without sound, so evolution gave us a way to hear the quiet ones coming. I can feel a teacher's footsteps 2 corridors away. I can feel the thick double heartbeat of the HFY boy who shares my bench. I can feel dust land. I did not feel her arrive. 1 second the doorway of Lecture Hall 9 was empty. The next, she was standing in it, and my antennae had registered no displaced air, no footfall, no warning of any kind, as if she had simply been inserted into the moment rather than walked into it. For 3 full heartbeats I sat there with my antennae pressed flat to my skull, trying to work out what I'd missed, while Professor Threll kept lecturing and 30 other students kept not noticing anything strange at all. That was the first wrong thing. The second wrong thing was her eyes. She was small, smaller than me, narrower than the HFY boy beside me by a wide margin. Wrapped in soft dark fabric, a bag over one shoulder, hair bound back from a face that had no ridge, no plate, no armor of any kind. By every rule I'd been taught, she was prey. Soft. Slow. Undefended. Then she looked at the room. Her eyes moved first, a fast, silent sweep from left to right across every seat, every exit, every body, and only after that scan finished did her head turn to follow. I had seen that exact motion exactly once before, in a second-year predator behavior simulation. Ambush hunters track with their heads. Endurance hunters track with their whole bodies. Only pursuit predators let their eyes find the target first and their skull follow, because for a pursuit predator, the head isn't a sensor. It's a weapon mount. Class, Professor Threll said, in the carefully flat voice instructors use when they've been briefed on something they don't like, this is our new exchange student. She'll be with us for the term. Please make her welcome. Her name was Marin Voss. She was human. I'd heard the word before, in passing, a new contact species from somewhere in the mid-spiral, thin on detail in the education feeds. New species join the wider galaxy every few decades, this shouldn't have been remarkable. What was remarkable was that Professor Threll's second pair of arms stayed locked tight against his ribs the entire time he spoke, which for a Duskani is as close to a clenched jaw as their anatomy allows. Marin smiled. A small closed-mouth thing, no teeth. Half the front row smiled back before they caught themselves. Beside me, the HFY boy, Borin, all 600 kilos of him, leaned toward her with the easy confidence of someone who'd never once in his life been the smaller animal in a room. Then, with no visible cause, he leaned back. His neck frill, the cartilage ring HFY males flare when they're asserting themselves, stayed clamped flat against his throat. She was shown to an empty seat and crossed the room to it, and I tried to track her footsteps and could not really, even accounting for the soft-soled shoes, the sound she made moving across a hard composite floor was almost nothing. Every joint in her body seemed to swallow its own impact before it could reach the ground. That isn't training. That's 10,000 generations of something with bigger teeth listening for you. She sat. She folded her hands. She looked at Professor Threll with an expression of polite attention, and I realized I'd been holding my breath equivalent for nearly half a minute. The lecture resumed. I didn't hear a word of it. At the first break, I pulled her species file from the Academy network. What I found, or didn't find, made the flat antennae feeling worse. Homeworld, Earth. Classification, pending review. That alone was strange. Every integration program species arrived with a full planetary profile, because the entire point of integration is knowing what you're integrating with. Earth's file was a wall of black bars. Atmospheric composition, restricted. Predator-to-prey ratio, restricted. Evolutionary origin of the dominant species, withheld by the Integration Board. The only field left fully open was her dietary classification. Omnivore, adaptive. I stared at those two words longer than I should have. Omnivore isn't unusual. But adaptive isn't a diet, it's a warning label. It means the organism has no fixed requirements. It eats what's there. It doesn't need to be selective, because it's never been anything but hungry and moving. That is not a trait of something that gets hunted. That's a trait of something that never stopped being the hunter. I closed the file and went to find out exactly what I'd let sit down 3 rows in front of me. At the midday meal I watched her from 4 tables away, telling myself this was field observation, that my xenobiology training practically required it. It was not entirely a lie. She picked up a malaloc fruit, thick-skinned, rated class 4 hardness, the kind everyone else opened with a blade, pressed her thumb against the rind, and peeled it off in one unbroken strip with her bare fingers. No strain. No pause. She ate it looking out the window like nothing had happened, and nobody else in the hall so much as glanced over. I was the only one who saw a small, quiet creature casually demonstrate a grip strength 2 classifications above what her body should have allowed. That night I found the only unredacted research paper on Earth's biosphere, 6 pages, most of it blacked out since first publication. Earth's gravity sat at 1.0 standard. The galactic median for worlds that produce sapient life is 0.6. Nearly double. Everything born there lived under a load that would slowly grind most species down over the course of a year, and the things that evolved under it didn't just survive it. They ran. They climbed. They built cities under it and swam through water that outweighed the fluid we pour foundations with. One line stopped me cold: persistence predation over multi-day pursuit windows. I didn't need it explained. Before humans had tools, before fire, before any of it, they hunted by picking something faster and stronger than themselves and simply refusing to stop following it. Not sprinting. Following. Across hills, across rivers, through heat that should have forced a rest cycle, until the animal being chased, faster, better armed, better built for the terrain, simply stopped, because nothing on that planet had evolved to run forever except the one thing chasing it. I set the paper down and looked at my ceiling for a long time. In the morning she was already in her seat, hands folded, bag on the floor, and she gave me that same closed-mouth smile when I walked in. I smiled back, my body answered before my mind could stop it. And sat 3 rows behind her, and spent the whole lecture trying to convince myself the Integration Board knew exactly what it was doing, putting a pursuit predator from a death world into a classroom full of species that had never once needed to run from anything. I couldn't convince myself. The semester had barely started, and I already couldn't look away. The chemistry lab session 2 days later started like every other. Professor Threll handed out the equipment trays, ran through safety protocol, paired us off. I got Vash, a scarrow whose 4 compound eyes made him a superb observer and whose ambush predator temperament made him nearly impossible to talk to. He watched the reactions. I took notes. Neither of us spoke unless the experiment demanded it. Marin was paired with Boran, directly across the aisle, close enough that I could track them both without turning my head. He handled the heavy glassware. She measured reagents into smaller vessels. He'd settled into a cautious warmth around her over the past 2 days, the kind you offer someone when your instincts say one thing and your manners say another. She made it easy for him. She laughed at his jokes. She told him about something called snow, frozen water falling out of the sky, and he reacted with such open amazement that she laughed again, and for a moment the lab just felt like a lab. Then the glass broke. It was a pipette, standard issue, rated for a grip well above what any student in an intro course should generate. Marin's fingers tightened around it by some fraction that would have meant nothing on anyone else in the room. It didn't crack. It collapsed inward and opened a clean line across her palm. She said something short in her own language, clearly a mild curse, the kind you say when you stub a toe, not when you cut your hand open. Looked at the wound, pressed a cloth to it, and started wrapping it with the practiced calm of someone who'd done this many times. That was when the smell hit the room. My antennae caught it before my mind did, a complex, metallic chemical signature riding the warm air. I decoded it the way my species decodes everything, automatically, instantly, and the answer landed like a cold hand on my thorax. Iron. Free-floating, blood-bound iron. The fluid coming out of her hand wasn't just red. It was saturated with the same element used in hull plating and structural alloy, dissolved and circulating inside a living body, now open to the air. 3 students went down almost together. A Nelore girl in the front row, whose sensory tendrils could taste a room's chemistry from across it, locked rigid and toppled off her stool, unconscious before she landed, her species' proximity alarm, the one built in for exactly this. 2 rows back, a small quick-bodied Vantic boy started vomiting, his gut rejecting itself in blind panic at a compound his homeworld only ever associated with apex predators. At the end of the row, a boy named Doss froze and began clicking, a fast, sharp distress call encoded into every Vantic dialect since before they had language, meaning, something dangerous is close and it is too late to run. The room came apart into controlled panic. Professor Threll called for calm with all 4 arms spread wide. Through the noise, Marin stood exactly where she was, cloth pressed to her palm, and looked at the room with an expression that wasn't confusion. It was recognition. She'd seen this before, or something enough like it that her response wasn't surprise, it was protocol. She lowered her wrapped hand. She opened the other one, palm out, empty. She stepped back from the nearest students and held still, visible, doing nothing further while staff rushed to the collapsed 3. I stayed at the doorway after everyone else filed out, telling myself I didn't know why. Through it, I watched a medic scan her palm. The wound was already closing, clotting, I'd learn the word later, and the medic's face did something I could read across species, the look of someone seeing numbers that shouldn't exist. They seal while conscious, I heard the medic say to a colleague, low, careful. Mobilization's faster than a Class 3 battlefield nanite suite. And the pain signal's present, it's just not triggering a shutdown. The brain gets the damage report and keeps running anyway. How? The medic looked at Marin, who was thanking them politely and asking if the 3 who'd collapsed were going to be all right, asking with real worry. No idea. I'm filing for a full hazard reclassification on her species before end of day. I went back to my quarters and reread the survey paper. This time I found the section on disease, tucked between paragraphs on tectonics and atmosphere like a footnote. Earth's biosphere held an estimated 1 trillion distinct microbial species. I checked the number twice. Humans hadn't survived that by avoiding it. They'd survived it with an internal war that never ended. A network of cells that hunted, cataloged, and destroyed anything foreign, every second, from birth to death, so continuously that most of them never even noticed the war was happening. A human body wasn't an organism. It was a battlefield that never went quiet, and they won it so completely they'd stopped counting the cost. Campus was different after that, in no way that would show up on a report, but different the way a room changes once you've seen something in the corner that shouldn't be there. People gave Marin a little more room in the halls, not obvious, not enough to flag, just a few extra steps of distance, a pause before stepping into a lift she already occupied, conversations that dimmed rather than stopped, which was somehow worse than silence because it was dishonest. Boran didn't change. I watched him ask her directly, the next morning, if her hand was healing. She peeled back the edge of the dressing to show him new pink tissue already forming, and he nodded with the flat acceptance of a species that understood injury on a gut level, even if the speed of it was foreign to him. It was, maybe, the first thing they'd found in common that wasn't built on politeness. I spent the next 2 evenings in the restricted archive. There wasn't much that hadn't been sealed. A comparative anatomy chart with most human entries marked exceed standard parameters. A dietary note confirming adaptive meant she could extract nutrition from compounds most species classified as toxins, capsaicin, ethanol, things that would damage another body but registered on hers as minor irritants, or even pleasures. And one paragraph, from a behavioral science assessment, written in plain language as if the author had given up on staying clinical. Human cognitive architecture combines sustained abstract reasoning with a threat processing speed that rivals dedicated combat species. They problem solve under duress. They can feel fear and act regardless. They can feel pain and keep thinking. They recognize they are outmatched and engage anyway, not from irrationality, but from a calculated judgment that the cost of doing nothing is worse. This combination has no parallel in our species database. I read it 3 times, then lay awake thinking about a girl who could weigh a risk in the space between 2 heartbeats and choose to take it anyway. 7 days into her enrollment, the Academy ran its quarterly physical assessment, routine, mandatory, usually forgettable. This time the equipment had been recalibrated. I noticed it walking past the grip station. The display read maximum calibration, class 8, 2 full classes higher than last quarter. Nobody needed to explain why. Marin arrived in standard athletic gear that looked almost absurd on her: lean, unremarkable arms, proportional legs, a small soft-bodied girl who by every visible measure belonged somewhere in the lower third of any physical ranking. She looked nervous, asked the monitoring staff cautious questions about the machines, and half the cohort visibly relaxed. Whatever the lab rumors had implied, here was proof the human was nothing special. Boren, arms crossed over his chest, leaned toward a nearby student. "Don't worry," he said, loud enough to carry. "I'll go easy on the curve." Laughter. Even Marin smiled, quick, maybe genuine, maybe the reflexive camouflage of a species that had learned, over 10,000 years of competing with its own kind, to look harmless around rivals. She stepped up to the grip dynamometer, placed her hand on the pad, and squeezed. The number passed Class 2, my species ceiling. Passed Class 4, the top for most avians and insectoids. Passed Class 5, where the midweight species maxed out. It hit Class 6, where every reasonable estimate of her body mass said it had to stop. It didn't stop. It hit Class 7, one below the machine's redesigned ceiling, one below a species that weighs 400 kilos and has hands the size of dinner plates. Marin weighed maybe 60. She flexed her fingers like working out a cramp and stepped away like she'd just filled out a form. The reflex platform came next. Her times weren't the fastest, that belonged to Vash, whose ambush neurology let him move before a light had finished its first pulse. But by the 20th trial his times were degrading, his system burning through its chemical reserve, and by the 30th the staff pulled him off, spent. Marin's times never moved. 50 trials, the same speed, the same precision, no decay, because her nervous system wasn't built to burn hot and fast and crash. It was built to hold steady for as long as a chase demanded, because the chase, on her world, didn't end until the hunter decided it did. Endurance cycling favored the heavy species, as always, Ketheri with their huge reserves, Nelori with their double hearts. Marin started in the middle of the pack, unremarkable. Boren, 3 platforms over, looked dominant for the first 20 minutes. Then, one by one, the ambush species dropped off, their metabolism spiking and crashing. Then the midfield thinned. At 25 minutes Boren's hide flushed dark with heat stress and he stepped off with a grunt that shook the rack beside him. Marin kept going. Her skin flushed red, sheened with fluid, sweat, an evaporative cooling system I'd only read about, and the sensors around her station registered something that made the staff trade a look. The air immediately around her was measurably cooler than the room. She was air-conditioning her own skin while outlasting 80% of the cohort. She cycled 40 minutes and only stopped because the test ended, not because she had. The cold pod finished it. Most warm-blooded species tapped out 15 degrees below their baseline comfort. Marin reported she was uncomfortable but fine. They pushed the temperature lower. She started to shiver, not flailing, just a fine, constant full-body tremor, and her core reading didn't drop. It held. In places, it climbed, her body burning fuel to fight the cold in real time. They pulled her out only when the pod hit its own safety floor. The scores went up 15 minutes later, and the gymnasium went quiet. She hadn't topped a single category. Someone had beaten her in every one of them individually. But she sat in the top 15% of all 7 simultaneously: strength, speed, reflex, endurance, cold tolerance, sustained output, recovery. Every other species in the room had traded one capability for another. She'd traded nothing. She had no weak point for anyone to aim at. Boran stared at the board a long time. His neck frill didn't move. I found her afterward in the hallway, cloth around her neck, breathing back to normal. "Hey," she said. "Kessa, right? You sit behind me in Threll's class." I nodded, and Tenny still reading every trace her recovering body was giving off, all of it saying the same thing. "This organism is already ready again." "I wanted to ask," she said, and there was something careful in it, something almost shy. "The xenobiology exam's coming up. I'm still catching up on the material. Want to study together? No pressure if you're busy." I looked at the hands that had shattered lab glass, the body that had just out-endured a room of predators bred for it, and she was asking me to study with the nervous energy of someone bracing to be turned down. "Yes," I said. "I have time." She smiled, the full one, teeth and all, and my hindbrain flagged it as a threat display for half a second before my forebrain overruled it. I walked away telling myself this was ordinary academic collaboration and telling myself several other things that evening, most of them lies. We studied twice, once in the library, once in the dining hall after hours, and I learned more about her in those 2 sessions than in the 2 weeks of reports and readouts before them. She was curious in a forward-leaning, active way, chasing an idea to the next one with an intensity that was as endearing as it was unsettling, pulling a principle out of chemistry and dropping it into a hypothesis about planetary ecology like the boundary between subjects didn't exist for her. She told me about food chains, except on Earth it wasn't a chain, it was a tangle. Predators ate other predators. Prey species evolved into predators of their old predators' young. Parasites hijacked host nervous systems to serve their own reproduction. Nothing was stable. Nothing was safe. The only rule was that whatever stopped adapting, stopped existing. I asked if humans sat at the top of it. She thought about that, head tilted, her processing face. "We do now," she said. "But we didn't start there. We were prey for a long time. Big cats, wolves, things with worse teeth than us. We survived because we were clever and we worked together. But we lost a lot of people doing it. Children, especially. The predators took the children first." She said it flat, and the flatness was worse than grief would have been, the particular calm of a species that had processed a wound so old it had become architecture. That one sentence explained more about human minds than every restricted file I'd read. Over the following days I learned she could hold her breath past 2 minutes, discovered by accident during an atmospheric drill when she failed to mask up in time and the system flagged her as a casualty, only to find her standing calm in the vacuum corridor, lungs sealed, metabolism deliberately slowed. I learned she slept in short bursts rather than one long cycle, napping, she called it. Dropping into unconsciousness for 20 minutes and waking sharp and rested, which the first time terrified me enough that I spent the whole 20 minutes watching her vitals. I learned she could cry, not distress calling, just a quiet, controlled release that came with more than fear, happiness, frustration, nostalgia, being moved by something. The first time I saw it, during a lecture on an extinct species and its memorial, I reached for the medical alert before she stopped my hand and told me, gently, that this was normal, that humans did this when something mattered. Everything about her was impossible. Everything about her was real. 3 weeks into the term, on a gray afternoon under a clouded dome, the alarm hit mid-lecture. Not a drill, drill's pulse. This one held, a continuous low frequency built to trip the threat response of every species on campus at once. The building intelligence spoke over the channel, flat and precise: unauthorized biological hazard, Eastern Bioresearch Wing. Classification: active predatory fauna, uncontained. Species: Kethrak stalker, single adult. Shelter in place. Security response: 11 minutes. Students moved to the reinforced corners, pulled emergency barriers from the walls, clustered tight. A Nelori girl cried without sound, tendrils locked against her skull. I knew what a Kethrak stalker was: 40 kilos, low and fast, built to slip through narrow gaps, hunting by heat signature through walls and floor, striking from cover with a venomous tail spine that could drop a Kethari for 6 hours and stop a smaller species breathing in minutes. The bio wing sat one open corridor away, 40 meters, no barriers between it and us. If it had reached the connector, it was already effectively inside. Security was 11 minutes out. A stalker could cross 40 meters in 3 seconds. Marin stood up. Not fast. No sudden motion, the same fluid rise she used for everything. She stood in the aisle looking at the sealed door, and her face did something I hadn't seen on it before. Not fear, I knew fear on her now, the tightening around the eyes, the faster breath. This was colder and older, something underneath all the polite smiles and study sessions. How big? She asked the room, without turning around. I was the only voice that worked. About 40 kilos. Fast over short distance. Hunts by heat. Tail spines, paralytic. She nodded, took her jacket, and wound it tight around her left forearm from wrist to elbow, a crude pad. Then she crossed to a workstation, gripped a metal support strut, and pulled. It bent. She adjusted her grip and pulled again, and it tore free of the frame, a meter of metal rod, as thick as 2 fingers together. Voss. Professor Threll's voice cut across the room. The building's in lockdown. That door is sealed. You cannot open it, and you should not try. She reached the door, studied the control panel for 2 seconds, and pried the cover off with her nails. Behind it, the manual override, built into every door for exactly this failure. She found the release and disengaged the lock. The door opened. Red emergency light filled the corridor beyond. She stepped through it alone, rod in one hand, wrapped arm raised like a shield, and the door shut behind her. For 5 seconds nobody moved. Then Boran lunged for the wall display and pulled up the corridor feed. She walked, not ran, at the pace of someone crossing a room to answer a knock. Head up, eyes sweeping corners in that same predator scan. At the junction she found it. Low, plated, modeled to match the shadow, heat pits locked on her from the far end of the passage, tail already fanned open with its crown of spines. It had been tracking her the whole way in. It charged. 10 meters covered in under a second, claws tearing at the floor. She didn't run, didn't flinch, didn't freeze. She shifted her weight, pivoted, and sidestepped. Not with panic, with timing, the kind that comes from 100,000 years of a nervous system computing evasion before the conscious mind even finishes registering the threat. It passed through the space where she'd been standing. She brought the rod down on the seam between skullplate and spine, precise, controlled, enough to stagger it without killing it outright. It stumbled, its tail lashing out reflexively, spines hammering into the wrapped arm she'd raised. The fabric held, mostly, 2 layers punctured, none reaching skin. She grabbed the tail below the spine cluster with her bare hand and held it still while the creature thrashed, 40 kilos of panic trying to tear its weapon free of a grip that shouldn't have been able to hold it. She hit it twice more. It went limp, stunned, not dead. She turned from it and moved further in, to a Tuscany lab technician slumped against the wall near the wing entrance, a deep gash across his upper chest, losing color fast. She dropped to her knees, pressed both bare hands to the wound, and talked to him in a low steady voice I couldn't make out, keeping him oriented, keeping him conscious, until the security squad came through the connector 9 minutes later. The squad leader looked at the stunned stalker, the stabilized technician, and the girl kneeling in red light with blood on her hands and a bent furniture strut on the floor beside her. You took down a Kethrak stalker with a chair leg. She looked at the creature. It was only 40 kilos, she said, like that explained everything. When she walked back into the lecture hall, every student was standing, not because anyone told them to, but because sitting felt wrong. Her hands were shaking. Not fear. I understood it now, adrenaline, a combat chemical that sharpens everything while the threat lasts, burning off now that it was over, leaving the tremor behind like a weapon powering down. That evening the Academy's classification database updated. Earth's entry flipped from pending review to a designation in bright warning color, Class 12 Deathworld, a number that didn't exist on the standard scale until someone extended it to fit what her planet actually was. Her own student profile picked up a single new line, Integration Risk Assessment Revised. I didn't know what that meant administratively. I knew what it meant in practice. The people who'd sent her here were no longer certain it had been a good idea. She ate alone in the dining hall that night, the way she often did. I watched her from 4 tables away and thought about the corridor, the sidestep, the calm. She hadn't fought because she was brave. Bravery requires fear you act through anyway, and her readouts from the security feed showed something stranger. Her heart rate had spiked, her adrenaline had fired, but the parts of a brain that should have screamed run hadn't activated at all. She wasn't brave. She was operational. A 40-kilo predator wasn't a threat to her species, it was a problem with a solution. I picked up my tray, crossed the hall, and sat down across from her. Her face ran through surprise, caution, and settled on something like hope, an organism that could outfight the room, hoping someone would choose to sit with her anyway. Hey, she said. Hello, I said. We ate for a while without talking. It wasn't uncomfortable. Eventually I asked the question I'd been carrying since the doorway on the first day. What are you? She set her utensil down and looked at me directly, the polite layer dropping for a moment, leaving something underneath that wasn't threatening and wasn't gentle. Just real. I'm a human, she said. 16 standard years old. From a city called Duluth, on a planet called Earth. I'm good at math and terrible at drawing, and I miss home sometimes. A pause. But that's not what you're asking. No, I said. It isn't. She nodded, and looked, if anything, relieved. Like she'd been waiting for someone to ask and the waiting had been the worst part. Earth is a world where everything is trying to kill everything else, all the time, and has been for longer than most civilizations in this galaxy have existed, she said. Nothing there cooperates with its environment. It competes against it. Everything alive is alive because it outsurvived whatever tried to eat it, infect it, freeze it, or starve it. And humans didn't win by being the strongest, or the fastest, or the most venomous. We were never any of those things. Then how did you win? She looked at me with those forward-tracking eyes, and for the first time I saw something in them beyond calculation, depth, the weight of a mind carrying every kilogram of its own history. We never stopped, she said. That's the whole answer. When we were hungry, we chased things, not in bursts, not in sprints. We followed. When they ran, we followed. When they hid, we waited and followed. Across deserts, up mountains, through rivers that could have drowned us, for days if it took days, because every other predator on our world could outrun us over a short distance, but not one of them could run forever. We could. We just kept moving until the thing we were chasing collapsed, because its body gave out before ours did. Then we ate it. She said it without pride and without shame, flat, like weather. We broke bones and kept walking. We got sick and our bodies learned the sickness and burned it out from the inside. We ate things that were poison to everything else on the planet and figured out how to use them. We lived in deserts and ice and jungle and open ocean. We climbed where the air was too thin to breathe. We dove where the pressure should have crushed us. We did all of that before we made a single tool. She picked up a strip of meat from her tray. This is farmed, off a station somewhere in this system. On Earth, my ancestors would have run this animal's equivalent down over 3 days until it dropped from exhaustion, and eaten it raw, with their hands, sitting in the dirt, and been grateful, because it meant they'd survive another week. She set it down. Then we made tools. Rocks, then sharpened rocks, then rocks on sticks, then bows, then metal, then explosives, then things that can crack a planet from orbit. Every step, from the first thrown rock to the last warhead, was the same instinct: find the problem, solve the problem, survive. We never stopped improving because we never felt safe, because on Earth you're never safe. Something is always coming. If you stop moving, stop adapting, even for a moment, you die. She tapped her own chest, a light hollow knock. Every human alive is still carrying all of it. The chase instinct. The fight chemistry. The healing. The adaptability. It's all still in here, even the ones who've never run a day in their lives. 16-year-old girls from Duluth who like math and can't draw. 4 billion years of survival pressure, in every one of us, and it never switches off. It just waits. The hall had emptied around us. I asked the question that had been building since the morning I read her file and couldn't sleep. Then why are you here? Why send a predator to a school full of prey? Her expression changed, the flatness gone, replaced by something old and quiet and much deeper than anger. Because we don't want to be predators anymore, she said, and her voice caught, just slightly, on the last word. We were alone on our world for 200,000 years. Nothing but other predators for company. Everything else either ran from us or tried to kill us, and we beat it every time, and it never made us happy. It just made us alone. She turned her hands over, studying the palms that could bend metal and hold a thrashing tail still, like she was seeing them for the first time. We got out, she said. We looked up, we built what we needed, and we left. And the first thing we found out here was a galaxy full of people who take one look at us and start shaking. Who smell our blood and pass out. Who watch us move and see a predator wearing a person's shape. And I get it. I know what I am. I know that when that thing charged me in the corridor, my first instinct wasn't to run, it was to count its legs and figure out where to hit it. I know that's not what your species does when something with claws comes at you. She met my eyes. But I'm here. Because someone has to be first one to sit in the chair, eat lunch, fail the art exam, prove the monster is just a girl. First human the rest of the galaxy meets who isn't carrying a weapon or flying a warship or negotiating from a position of implied force. Someone has to just be a student. Just a person. Someone who wants to study for the xenobiology exam and maybe have one friend who doesn't look at her and see a Deathworld predator in a school uniform. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, the saline lines catching the low light. My mother cried when I left, she said, the subject shift so sudden my antennae twitched. Not because she was sad. Because she was proud. She told me I was going to change things, that someday some alien kid would read about the first human in a galactic school and not think predator. Think classmate. She told me it would be hard, that I'd be lonely, that some days I'd want to go home so badly it would ache. She was right about all of it. But she also told me every bridge in history got built by someone willing to stand in the middle of it while both sides decided whether to cross. She looked at me, eyes still wet. I'm standing in the middle, Kessa. And I'm so tired. But I'm still standing. Silence, long and full. I looked at her across the table. The face hiding a hunter's neurology, the eyes that tracked like something built to chase, the iron in her blood, the war her immune system waged every second she breathed, the hands that could kill, and the voice that had just cracked talking about being lonely. The girl who'd walked into a dark corridor alone with a piece of furniture because she couldn't stand to hear other people's fear while she had the power to end it. I reached into my bag and opened my xenobiology textbook, turned it around, and slid it across the table between us. Exams in 2 days, I said. You said you wanted to study. She stared at the book, then at me. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, and for 5 full seconds the most dangerous organism I had ever met couldn't find a single word. Then she smiled, not the careful one, not the diplomatic one she wore in hallways. The real one. Teeth and all, flat molars and sharp canines built for tearing meat from bone, and my hindbrain screamed and my forebrain said quiet, and I didn't flinch. Thank you, she said. You're welcome, I said. Now open to Chapter 9. Your understanding of multicardiac circulatory redundancy was wrong on 3 separate points last session, and I don't intend to be embarrassed by association on the final. She laughed. A real laugh, sudden and warm, and it filled the empty dining hall the way her arrival had filled the classroom doorway 3 weeks earlier, without warning, without precedent, without anything in my experience to prepare me for how it would feel. We studied until the lights dimmed for the night cycle. She walked me back to the residential wing, her footsteps still nearly silent beside my quick, light-tapping stride. At the junction where our paths split, she stopped. Kessa? Yes? In the corridor, with the stalker. Were you scared? I thought about it. I wasn't in the corridor. I know. But were you scared for me? I thought about the moment she'd stepped through that door alone into the red light. About my antennae pressed flat to my skull the entire time, in the posture my species has carried since before we had language, the one that means something is wrong and I cannot stop it. Yes, I said. I was terrified. She nodded slowly, and something ancient moved behind it, something older than 16 years and farther away than a city called Duluth. Good, she said. That means it mattered. She turned and walked away down the corridor, quiet, soft-footed, the overhead lights catching her dark hair and the pale line of her neck and the faint tremor still in her hands that she thought I couldn't see, but that I felt through the floor with every step she took. She walks like silence and bleeds iron and put down a stalker with a chair leg before third period ended. Her world tried to kill her every day of its evolutionary history, and she answered it by becoming the most adaptable, most relentless, most unkillable thing in the known galaxy. She sits behind, now beside me in xenobiology, and borrows my notes, and worries about her art grade, and misses home, and laughs at jokes that aren't funny because she's grateful someone bothered to tell her one. A Deathworld predator wears her skin. But underneath the iron blood and the pursuit hunter stamina and the immune system fighting its endless war, there's a girl who crossed a galaxy because she was tired of being feared. Who ate alone for 3 weeks rather than watch one more person flinch from the smell of her. Who walked into a dark corridor with a piece of furniture because she couldn't bear to sit still while someone else was afraid and she had the power to make it stop. She is the most dangerous thing I have ever met, and she is my friend. And I think when the histories get written, and the galaxy looks back on the day it first met the species from the Class 12 world that should only have produced monsters, what they'll remember isn't the iron blood, or the grip strength, or the stalker that fell to a schoolgirl with a length of scavenged metal. They'll remember that she asked to borrow my notes, and I said yes, and neither of us flinched.